Brazil in the year 1894 when Charles Miller landed at the port of Santos with 2 balls in his hands. Oscar Cox and his 19 friends established the first football club in Rio. They called it Fluminense. The games quickly developed into a fashionable social event. The players were the youth of wealthy local families, for whom Fluminense was a great way to show their international sophistication. The participation of dark-skinned people in football was refused, but this did not suppress their enthusiasm. They climbed to the rooftops of the surrounding buildings to watch the game, and so the sport spread quickly through the poorer parts of town. Bangu Athletic Club was the first to let dark-skinned players into the field in 1904. Mulattoes were slowly allowed in the teams, but they needed to try and hide their skin color. A player called Arthur Friedenreich tried straightening his hair before games to look whiter, and Carlos Alberto, another player in Fluminense, used rice powder to whiten his face. Consequently, rice powder became the club's nickname. Fluminense fans till today still spread rice powder in the air to celebrate goals. Membership rules of the bigger Brazilian clubs were aimed to keep the clubs as white as possible. The goal was to strengthen the concept of white supremacy, which had been weakened by the abolition of slave trade. Vasco da Gama, the Portuguese club of Rio, instead of using only their own players of Portuguese background, broke the hegemony of the big clubs by bringing in the best players from the league of poorer areas, regardless of skin color. According to the amateur rules, all players needed to have an occupation other than football. So, the Portuguese community gave jobs to the players in their shops. This so-called fusy professionalism enraged big clubs, and they organized a league of their own, and Vasco was not invited to take part. Vasco da Gama, though, was hugely popular and got finally invited. The catch was that there was a rule that was supposed to make sure that poor and black could not participate. The players were required to be able to write their names. This did not stop Vasco. They sent their players to reading and writing classes, and if necessary, shortened their names, thus creating the distinctive tradition of Brazilian players' names. The next thing the league tried to keep Vasco players out was to require every club to have their own stadium. To this, the Portuguese responded again with style by building the biggest stadium in the country, Sao Januário. Brazilian dribbling goes back to the racism of the early years when black players got tackled very hard. Instead of physical strength, they needed to use their wits and skills to kick the ball. Football had now become the sports of the whole nation. Gilberto Freire published his groundbreaking book, Masters and Slaves, which turned around completely the racial thinking of the past. Before Freire, the Brazilian multi-ethnicity was seen as a burden to the country. He was the first to point out how much it gave Brazil. He took what was viewed as negative and turned it to positive. He praised playfulness and mischief as a national characteristics to be cherished. Sports journalists took Freire's theory and put them to use by claiming this easily identifiable Brazilian style to be a great testimony for the unique ethnic blending of the country. In 1919, the South American Championship tournament, Copa America, took place in Rio de Janeiro, and Brazil won the title for the first time. Arthur Friedenreich, who scored in the final, rose to fame that so far was unseen for a sportsman. Among other things, his shoes were put on display in a downtown jewelry shop. By the 1930s, many people had raised the issue of changing the name of the game, as football was, of course, very English. Suggestions included Futebol, Bolape, and Balipodo, but none of these, finally, were widely used. Instead, sports journalists started using the English word in a localized form, Futebol. Futebol was not the game Charles Miller brought to Brazil in 1894. Futebol was a sport that was played like dancing. It was a sport that united a nation and showed its greatness. And so, we salute the heroes of the day. You made us understand in silent language, writing in your entrancing winged feet, an international epopee.